Hi, welcome to Uncommon Visionaries Go to Market Sessions, a series where we explore the latest trends and challenges facing go to market leaders and how to take them on. I'm Linda Lian, the co founder and CEO of Common Room, the leading community growth platform. And today I'm joined by advisor, mentor, friend, incredible revenue leader, GC Lionetti, who is currently the Chief Revenue Officer of Zapier. It's a pleasure having you, GC. Can you tell us a little bit more about your incredible path and what you do at Zapier?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Linda. So a little bit about me. So I spent most of the interesting parts of my career at companies like Atlassian, Dropbox, Confluent, and currently Zapier. So across these companies, I've had the opportunity to take on roles in go-to-market that include everything from sales to product to growth to marketing. And all these roles have given me incredible opportunities to learn from different go-to-markets. And I'll touch on some of those real quick. At Atlassian, it gave me a perspective on building a multi-product self-serve motion with really limited human interaction. We'll touch on that probably later in the conversation. Dropbox gave me a lens of driving extreme volume via self-serve and like really a human touch motion to build a business that at that time was over $1 billion. Confluent gave me a view on how bottoms up and tops down sales can interplay in like a true enterprise motion. And at Zapier, we're leveraging our product and ecosystem to build a truly hybrid go to market. And this is leveraging things like product led growth and human led growth. If you wrap all that in a bow, most of my career has been kind of like tinkering with the go to market functions in different ways to drive revenue. So that's like my career in a nutshell.
Wow, that's quite the resume, and we're so lucky to have you here today sharing some of your insights and experiences. We'll dive a lot more into this, but I think you were one of the people that had sort of built these product-led growth or community-led growth motions long before that word existed. And I love kind of that intersection that you always talk about between the importance of both product led growth, but also that human touch and that hybrid motion when it comes to building modern revenue organizations. So you've seen and built go to market at so many incredible, iconic businesses. It seems like at this point in time, in our present today, go to market is harder than ever before. We talk to CMOs and CROs every day who are lamenting that email open rates are down. SEO isn't converting as well. Cookie tracing is going away. Privacy concerns are on the rise. We've heard that there's a disconnection between organizations and their customers, right? Gartner has an interesting stat that sellers today only have 5% of their customers' attention during the journey. What do you think about sort of these doom and gloom trends? Have you seen those effects borne out? What should modern revenue leaders be thinking about?
Yeah, so it's kind of the way you phrase it, is like, I think there's like a doom and gloom aspect to it, right? Where there's a lot of trends that I would say like are kind of like pointing in the wrong direction for go to market teams, but I'm an optimist, right? Like, I believe like really what comes out of, let's say, challenging times or difficult times, like is an opportunity to really reinvent like your go-to-market motion. I think some of the most interesting things that happen on the go-to-market side really happen when you're trying to like work against the trends, right? Especially in the negative direction. And so there's a couple things like I throw out to people as you said that I'm kind of like thinking about it, which is, what works today may not work tomorrow, right? And but I think if you think of the things that are working today, how do you leverage those? Like, how do you use those as like learning assets, like for the next thing you're going to do? And if you think about that from a pure go-to-market perspective, let me give you an example, right? Like, you mentioned SEO, and if SEO is not converting well, could you now look at SEO as maybe like a larger play for yourself on owned content, right? Like, so maybe it's not just like the page that's not converting, but maybe it's the topic that is not right, right? Or maybe you need to go bigger on your SEO strategy beyond just what you're doing today. So like, can you really leverage what you're doing today to learn, even if the metrics maybe today are pointing in the wrong direction, right? And kind of like point them in the right direction. The next thing I think about is like, how can you reinvent your go to market? So what I believe will happen with go to markets over the next, especially over the next couple of years, not just with the trends that you mentioned, but really where like the macroeconomics stand, and if you really think about that, a lot of companies are going to reinvent their go to market. So think about it. I can almost assure you, and these are a lot of companies that I advise for, if they're like a human led motion, right, where they're really more sales driven, what are they thinking about today? They're like, like, can we do more on the product side, right? Can we do more on the community side to drive growth for our business and push our business forward? And then you have the opposite impact, right, or opposite effect for PLG companies, right? Or these product led growth companies that are community driven that are like, okay, maybe it's trying to leverage a human led motion to be like additive to our business. And so there's an opportunity here to really rethink your business. And I think we're actually afforded that time right now. Not just because of the trends you mentioned, but because of the times that we're in. So I can hit more on that, but that's some things that I'd push on with folks as you think through these maybe more challenging times.
Yeah, I love that concept of reinventing what go to market means, because ultimately go to market it's a human. You're bringing value to a group of humans. You're building relationships with a group of humans, and software consumers, like all people, they kind of evolve over time, right? We're in this age where there's more digital touch points and digital channels and conversational channels than ever before for, your users to kind of engage with your brand and your products. And so everything you're saying is resonating with, what we see as well, right? PLG companies trying to figure out the bridge between product led and human led, human touch, driven companies and sales teams really starting to think about the importance of building community and that digital user relationship. I have a more specific question for you. So, with many PLG companies, right, the bulk of their revenue will come from maybe a small sliver of their usage base. And I think that there's this common misconception out there that users who do come via that inbound or self-serve or PLG motion, who are trying out that free product without talking to sales, are more likely to be long tail users. But what we see with our work with leading PLG companies and our own experience building Common Room is that this really isn't the case anymore, right? As purchasing power flows down to the end user, that solution discovery and adoption is happening in these digital channels more and more, even for users who belong to large enterprises. So how have you thought about kind of allocating that attention between product-led motions and sales-led motions and creating that bridge at a place like Zapier or the previous companies that you've helped build?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, right? Like, so you find that push and pull, right? Like between what we call product led and then human led and the interplay between them. I think it's kind of like maybe the $1 billion question these days of how do you make both? How do you get the most out of both of those motions? And so when I think about this, like I think the way I've always thought about this in my career, it's not necessarily the motion, but it's like what can you get, like what's the best customer experience and will have the like best revenue impact, right? Like on your business and just kind of like balancing those. In some cases, it's awesome to have a customer like flow through your product, never talk to a human. And in some cases, it's actually the worst experience a customer could go through. Like they need some human touch motion, right? So you need to be able to figure out how to do both, right? Really well. So allocating time, I think, depends on what you're trying to do. So let's like double click on that a little bit, which is for a product led motion, like there's a decision you have to make there. Is your product an adoption funnel for you or is it a monetization funnel? And so sometimes it's a little bit of both, but like you really have to think through which one of those funnels do you want it to be for you. A lot of times what ends up happening is a lot of companies will say, I want my product led motion to purely be like a monetization funnel, but then they're disappointed at the output because you're right, like maybe it is long tail and the effort they're putting into it and the experience they're providing within the product like is that small sliver. It's like small usage. They're not, they think if you kind of like build it, they will come. And I don't know if that's true. I've actually, if folks have experienced that with a product led motion, I'd love to hear about that at some point, right? But I've never experienced that. Then there's a human led motion, right? Where like you want to build this human process and this motion in it at the most efficient way that you can into this overall go-to-market motion. The beauty of the bottoms-up motion or the product-led motion, there's a lot of different names for it, but like the beauty of it is you're really bringing your customer and they're starting with a product experience, right? Like, so the way I like to like verbalize this is like the first salesperson they're talking to you is your product, right? And that's a neat experience. Like they get to like touch and feel their way into like the best parts of your product. And you need to provide that experience as well. But as they go through that motion, there are triggers, and maybe we'll talk about this after this, but there's triggers and ways to identify like a human touch part to this, right? Where you could expand on what that customer is doing. But ultimately, in some cases, these customers or these potential customers may know your product almost better than you do before they talk to a salesperson, right? And that's actually the motion you want, in my opinion. That's like the beauty of this model. So to say it's long tail, I think is just a misconception. I think it's the way people utilize it, and that's something that folks just have to, you have to figure out what's right for your business, right?
Well, GC, you've built go-to-market machines at some iconic businesses, right? Self-serve at Atlassian with a multi-product portfolio, growth at Dropbox, commercial open source at Confluent, now at Zapier. Very different types of users, very different business models. And I think what's consistent across all of them is that they are famous for having an incredible user community. So what does community mean to you?
So it's somewhat interesting. It was different at each place, right? Like there was some commonalities, but it was very different and really the impact of community was quite different at each of those organizations. Maybe I'll touch on Atlassian and Confluent just because I think those have some very interesting components in them that are similar but yet different. If you think of Atlassian, especially early days, this is in like I'm going to date myself here, 2014, 2015 timeframe, before it was the kind of the billion-dollar giant or multi-billion-dollar giant that it is today. Atlassian was a commercial product, but it garnered this incredible, what I call it juju, right? Like this incredible like momentum from a lot of them consider them almost like an open source product. It felt like an open source product. It was almost in a weird way. I hate to use this word, but it's true. Like a cult like following. That's what it felt like. And if you think of every company that I've gone to, one of my criteria for joining that company is that exact thing. Is like it has to have like almost an obsessive mentality about the product, a love for the product, like a lust for the product. And that's where I think, you ask the question of like communities like lust over the product. Like they really do. And when you talk to folks about Atlassian at that time, they had this incredible, I would say, like relationship with the product, with the ethos of the company, et cetera. And so there was just this, like, when I think of community, I think of this gravitas towards the product, right? So that's like first thing. Second thing I'd call out for Atlassian was they really catered to this community. And what I mean by that is a lot of our principles as a company, a lot of who we were really reflected the community and the types of people that we wanted as Atlassian customers, right? And that was kind of a neat thing. We used to say internally that like our customers are a mirror who we are at Atlassian. And that became like the way we built our product, the way we built our culture. And it was just kind of like a neat thing to like almost reflect on even now that it works so well. Like that's the truth. And when you think about community at Atlassian, it ended up being the core driver of their self-serve model, right? There was this there was this momentum that you got from the community that really, it's almost like to some degree at that time you couldn't measure it. I think you can measure it a lot better today, with just like tools like yours, right? Like that's the truth, where like there's this word of mouth component that you couldn't touch and feel, like you could touch and feel, excuse me, but you couldn't get like the measurement off of it. And
You
so,
couldn't quantify it. It's like, how do
by
you
it, yeah,
quantify a flywheel or
we will,
virality,
yes,
right?
exactly. And but it was like it was such an interesting component because we knew it existed. We didn't ignore it, right? Like we actually catered to it, right? But today, if you think about it, in the world we live in today, I would argue it's even more like 1,000x more data driven than it was back then, and we just believed in it so much that we really like pushed on it, right? Like we pushed on leveraging this community of users who were like technical users, right? To drive our product and really drive our business. And I would argue that, you know, a large part of Atlassian's success and growth came from that. Like it was almost immeasurable, right? At that time.
I love the way you're describing it in that it's not a single program, right? It's not a Slack channel. It's not a forum. It's really this concerted, all up go to market strategy that orients around cultivating a passionate user base that's going to power up your product adoption and drive growth. And the fact that you guys did it in sort of the lack of data, which like tooling like ours today are, built to solve for, is almost like a leap of faith. And I think you guys kind of paved the way. How does that juxtapose against Confluent? I think, is it fair to say that while Confluent had an incredible developer community, the business model itself was different than Atlassian's?
100%. Like, so I think like, yeah, like I don't want to say polar opposite, but if you think about Confluent, there's a community centered around an open source technology called Kafka, right? And so this Kafka open source project really took on a life of its own and garnered millions and millions of developers using this technology. Truth is, though, it was free. It was open source. But it ended up becoming what I would say is like the distribution arm of Confluent. But Confluent is an enterprise business, right? Like, so you could think of them as more of a true enterprise play. I mean, there's also components of bottoms up there, but ultimately, like when you think of like the human led motion, a lot of that is what drives a business that is Confluent today. And so when you think about that, like you had to take this community driven approach and really figure out how to provide enough value in a product that people will pay for, and potentially even pay for it like at hundreds to even millions of dollars, right? And appeal to a
There's no
business or an
shame.
enterprise. Yeah, no,
I
totally,
think in
totally.
open source,
And it's
open core, sometimes like the concept of
no,
selling
totally.
software is somehow shameful, but the reality is,
But yeah,
we all,
yeah,
that's what we're
yeah,
building.
yeah. But the beauty of that model is this, and this is if there's like one takeaway or a big takeaway that I had from Confluent was every one of these developers who was using the open source product worked at an enterprise, right? Like they worked at the largest companies in the world, right? Whether they were banks, whether they were retail shops, whether they were e-commerce shops, it doesn't matter. Like in every part of or every industry and every vertical. And so where the open source and community aspect took place, there was folks were learning, engaging, again, falling in love with the technology that was Kafka, right? And when they needed to use it more of in a work environment, in a more structured setting, potentially even take it to something that was needed to be more scaled, they came to Confluent. And at that point, the technology was like so embedded in what they did that it was almost like a no-brainer, no matter what the cost is, no matter what the sales motion was, to adopt Confluent as well, right? So you're not just adopting Kafka, you're adopting Confluent. I just think that's a unique thing to do. I think it's a hard thing to do, to be fair, to take something that's free, open source, and really leverage it to create, ultimately what is now going to be a multi-billion-dollar business. I think is a neat thing to do, and it's quite different. But again, if you squinted both models, like it was largely driven by community. Like that was the core, right? Like that was the engine, and the rest was built on top of that, but in very different ways, very unique ways. Um, and I think a middle ground, if you don't mind me call it out, is Zapier, right? Like so, I think Zapier kind of like in my time here as chief revenue officer, like has it's one of the more interesting aspects of community where it reminds me very much of Atlassian, right? Where customers, again, lust over the product. There's an extreme love of the product. And our community is maybe even a little different than it was at Atlassian, where we have an audience of what I would call, operations types folks, think marketing ops, think sales ops, etc. There's an audience of IT, right? But there's an audience of technical users that could be engineers. And that's one part, right? Like those are the people that are, that's the gravitas to our product. And they kind of like lust after our product in that way. But the other part to it is this incredible ecosystem that we have, right? And so really the core to what we do as far as like workflow automation is we connect to all these different tools out there, right? And different apps. We're on our way towards 6,000 apps. And that's created a community in and of itself of just like, of an ecosystem and an environment where it's really flexible to use anything that you want. And Zapier will connect them, right? Like and really like create these, the simplest workflows, like to the most complex workflows that can power your business. So it's kind of neat that a community wasn't just formed off like the end users, if that makes sense, but it was also formed off this ecosystem, which is I think is quite unique in Zapier's case. So I've had the fortune of seeing all these different ways that community could be leveraged.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk quickly for the final question on the importance of understanding and mapping the customer journey. It's a topic that, you've thought a lot about. You've built the customer journey mapping at multiple businesses. What does understanding that customer journey enable your organization to do? And with the explosion of customer data out there, right, from digital engagement to conversations happening on social and in forums and all over the internet, to product usage and adoption metrics, what are the tools that you need to kind of tie this all together? And where does your customer journey start?
Yeah. All right. It's a loaded question, but I'm gonna hit a couple parts to it. And I'll get to answering your questions to some of these. Like, first thing I'd say is like especially like in a hybrid business model where you're, like at Zapier, where we're leveraging product-led growth, we're leveraging human touch. You have to really understand every step in that customer journey, right? And so for Zapier, it's understanding everything from trial to paid. Seems so simple, right? Trial to paid, and feels like two steps where the truth is the customer journey could be anywhere from, tens to hundreds of steps along the way, depending on the complexity of your product. And a couple of things like I'd encourage folks, to think about, or I encourage folks to think about, like one, map the journey. It's as simple as that. Like, I think that's important to do. Second, as you map the journey, map the factual journey. So what that means is document all the steps, but document the good, the bad, the ugly, the great, but map the factual journey, not the journey that you want, but the journey that you have. And then I think the next step to that over time, and I'm fast forwarding here, you want to map the ideal customer journey. So what's the delta between this factual journey that you have and then ultimately this ideal customer journey that you want to have and that you'll build over time, and you can understand those deltas. And a key point here is that like there's no right customer journey. A lot of times what happens is, we probably do this, right? Like we go through somebody's like flow or journey and we're like, we love this part to it, right? Like we love this step in the journey or this onboarding flow, and we ping it, we throw it over to our teams and we're like, look at this onboarding like flow. It's great. But the question for you has become like, you can't really replicate it, right? Like you could fit it into the overall, you have to fit it into your journey, right? Like, and for me, it's like, what's Zapier's journey, right? And what's Zapier's customer journey that we want to create. There's a couple tools and things you need to think about, or that like I've used over time that really start to connect the dots. First, you need something that's like really looking at your top of funnel and connecting the dots potentially all the way through to paid, whether that's through sale or self-serve. Common Room kind of fits that bill, right? Like, this isn't necessarily a Common Room pitch, right? Like it's a, hey, how can you actually like connect the dots between what's happening at the top of the funnel, whether it's in, you know, whether it's in a paid ad or, a Slack channel, how can you connect that one user all the way through to giving you money over time, right? And that's incredibly hard to do. Like I'd encourage folks who are kind of listening to this, like to say like, can I actually do that? I would argue that a large percentage of them, I won't state percentages, but I was going to go close to 100, right? Like, maybe like don't do that today. Maybe don't even know how they can get started there. So that's something I think about. It's just something at the top of the funnel. You'll have your different analytics tools. Everybody has their analytics tools of choice. It could be, I've used a myriad of tools, the Tableaus of the world, the Google Analytics of the world, the Lookers of the world, etc. But I think the way I'd verbalize this is like, just find like the medium for you that allows you to understand and visualize those touch points in as simple of a way as possible. And so that's the second thing I'd call out. And then really the last thing I'd call out is like, it is ultimately around just, like trust the data that you're looking at, right? But be okay if some things aren't perfect. So what I've learned about things like KPIs and customer journeys and all that stuff is you'll never get it right. That's a truth. It's an iterative process that you should be. It's hygiene. It's every day. It's always trying to figure it out.
It's not a destination that can be reached.
Totally. And so from that perspective, like you just want to trust what you're looking at and understand it. So you at least know where the trends are heading, maybe even where you have holes and risks. And I think that's like, that will serve you well over time. And so that's something that I think about through that journey.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot, and incredible tips for anyone who's, in that 100% of companies that are still striving and struggling to do this.
Yeah.
So final parting wisdom, what would be like the one piece of advice you would give go-to-market leaders today who may be at, a mid-market, hyper-growth SaaS startup who's looking down the barrel of 2023 and all of the uncertainty happening?
I'm gonna keep this one pretty straightforward. Simplicity matters. Like this is an important one where when you kind of get into times like this, times of uncertainty, your immediate reaction is to do all the things, and the truth is even to do the most complex things. Like it feels like the solution is hard. But what you really need to do for yourself and your team is like really simplify the world you're in today. Maybe focus on the things that have the highest value. Maybe focus on the things that you can measure, right? Maybe focus on the things that you can't measure, but intrinsically have value, and find the tools that can measure them, right? But simplicity will matter in this time, because everybody's going to be thinking, everybody's kind of in that, I would say that stress state, like to some degree of like, we're trying to solve a very hard problem. And I think just know you're not in it alone. I think a lot of companies, leaders, et cetera, are trying to solve these same problems. And so with that, like also lean on people to try to help answer some of your questions, right? Like, cause the answer it may even be obvious, but you may not see it, right? Like, and others may have figured it out.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we're all in this together, and everyone is trying to kind of do more with less. What we hear from a lot of our customers is, they're realizing, oh, we do have a community. We're just not part of the conversation, or we're not leveraging that data to map our customer journey from the top of the funnel through product activation, through conversion. Well, GC, this was incredible. I got a lot of helpful tips from myself and in building Common Room, and I hope our listeners did too. Thank you so much for joining us. To hear future conversations with other great go-to-market leaders like GC, follow Common Room on LinkedIn or Twitter, and to learn more about what we're building and how you can drive community growth, visit commonroom.io.